One of the interesting things that I've experienced in my life and probably will continue to experience is, especially living here in America more than any other place, is that every 4 years there's basically a referendum on people choosing their interests, choosing what's important to them. And I've found that every single 4 years it's a different story. There's different participants, obviously. Sometimes there's similar ones, but for the most part, it feels like people are voting, should I say, on their interests. And every 4 years, it's just kind of like, okay, that's where we're at. That's where the majority's at, in most cases. I think one of the interesting things that, unfortunately, I don't like to admit is that I have found that certain people value things differently than myself. I've spent the vast, vast majority of this show talking about my hopes and dreams for our planet to advance into the cosmos, to advance to different planets such as Mars or Saturn, even further out than that, but venture out into the universe, to colonize different planets, to use asteroids to mine for resources. I think in order for us to continue as a civilization and to what I say is spread the most amount of good possible is to go out, to explore, to travel to the Andromeda galaxy, to travel throughout our own Milky Way galaxy and do our best to spread the good things about our civilization, good things about us as humans, love, joy, laughter, appreciation, creativity, all of these things that make us human. I think would be extremely important if we were to venture out to spread these ideas. Obviously, not trying to be where we're at currently, where we fight over too many things, where we're cut off from other countries that are right next door to us. Personally, I don't know too many people from Canada. I don't know too many people from Mexico. And those are our direct neighbors. I would like for us to be a more collaborative Earth, to work together to advance the human race. Unfortunately, I think with our current setup that is not going to happen anytime soon. Artificial intelligence is interesting. It's something to certainly consider as possibly being able to unite us and bring us all together in kind of a common goal of advancing our civilization, advancing our species. I don't think that's happening anytime soon, which is unfortunate, but I think it's the reality. I think it's something that when I think about the topics that are discussed every 4 years, yeah, it's all important. The economy is important. Crime is important, of course. But there's other things that don't even get discussed. Things that I think are pretty important, like how are we going to leave this world for our great great grandkids? 100 years from now, I'm going to be most likely dead. But 100 years from now, let's say I'm still alive, I'd be 126. What's the world going to look like to my offspring in that time? Do I even have offspring at that time? There could be a possibility that you have a child and an unfortunate accident happens and their life is cut off shortly before they can start a family. And then your family tree is finished at that point as far as your DNA. I think it's very worrisome that in our society today, we focus on a lot of social issues that frankly aren't as important as working together to find a solution to where we're going to go next. How can we advance our civilization? How can us as human advance out into the cosmos, spreading the most positive things about our society? What are some of the things that are most important? To me, I would say it's having purpose, having a wife that I enjoy spending time with, having a dog that I enjoy spending time with. In the future, having children that I enjoy spending time with. What gives you purpose in life? Being able to sit down and do this podcast, and I haven't been able to do it in, frankly, way too long of time. And I often think to myself about what am I doing? What's kind of my life's journey? And as a 26-year-old, I really don't know a whole lot. I think I do, but I know I don't. It's a weird dilemma. Because people say that, and in the moment, I don't think so. I think I know everything. I think I have an answer to everything on, oh yeah, I'm going to figure out retirement. Oh yeah, I'm going to figure out having kids. Oh yeah, I'm going to figure out how to make $1 million. All of these different plans that I have for myself, I feel like I know, but I know that I don't, because when I was 25 years old or 24 years old or 23 years old, I was clueless. I didn't know how to manage many of the daily stressors that I had as effectively as I do now. I didn't have the same perspective. And on the podcast, yes, I talk about many of the same topics, but I've evolved in my understanding of my place within not only this earth, within my family, but in the universe, and kind of trying to see what I can do to add the best parts about being a human that I can. Trying to be a super nice guy. It's hard. It certainly is hard. Trying to provide for my family, which is very hard. Trying to be a good husband, which is very hard. Trying all of these certain things in life that require a lot of your energy is hard. But one of the things that's most important to me is this idea of knowing what I want. I want this civilization that we currently have in its current form, where we have things like a presidential election, where I'm able to exist in a time where we have elections and our leaders are not chosen by a random computer. Is that the future, potentially? I'm not sure. I don't want to live long enough to see that. A time where you can vote for the president through your phone. You don't have to go in person to vote anymore. Maybe that's better, but how I see it right now as a 26-year-old in 2024, excuse me, is I don't know. I don't know how technology is going to transform us. And unfortunately, all this AI stuff, all of the new iPhones, the new iPads, the new MacBooks, all of the technology that is created, I don't think it brings us together. I don't see a figure out there who's thinking like this. Elon Musk is close, but I don't know. I don't know if there is somebody who in our current society reminds me of a Carl Sagan, somebody who is begging and pleading for us to venture outward into the cosmos, to save our planet, to treat people nicely, because we're on a small little pale blue dot in the middle of nowhere, in a galaxy that is just one of many. We are not extremely special. What makes us special is our connection with other people. What makes us special is our creativity. What makes us special is our ability to love and to volunteer our time to help those out who need it. If there is life elsewhere in this universe, does it resemble us in any which way? We are carbon-based life, and as of right now, that's the only evidence that that's how life arises, but that does not mean it is the only. And maybe on a separate episode, I could potentially try and look into the science behind that, see if there is such a thing as silicone-based life instead of carbon-based life. But that is a deep dive for another day. One of the things that I have found that has given me peace when I feel so honestly pessimistic about our society and our civilization is the fact that there's at least one guy who, at some point, it's not his whole thing, but the richest man on earth, or one of the richest men on earth currently, is giving some credence to this. It's not his whole thing. It might be a pretty big part of one of his businesses that he runs, but it's not his biggest. I don't know if SpaceX is Elon Musk's biggest priority. I don't know if getting our civilization to Mars, to the moon, to out of our galaxy, a real possibility that I could even see the beginnings of in our lifetime. I don't think so. But I could very well be wrong. I think one of the more interesting things when it comes to something such as SpaceX is people need to be realistic. And I've seen these recent SpaceX missions and their flights, specifically speaking about Starship, seeing these launches and being kind of, okay, I don't know. I don't know if this current iteration is going to get us to Mars. I don't know if this current rocket is big enough to make a big difference. I don't know. I don't know if Elon's the guy to do it. Maybe he is, and I hope he is. I hope we have absolutely no issues with Elon, and his heart is completely within, or completely with, Starship, SpaceX, and the mission of getting us to be a multiplanetary civilization, which I think is very important for our species to survive. I want to talk about kind of what's been going on most recently with Spaceship. I think you take a look at the advancement of SpaceX over the past year or two has been pretty fast. And their most recent mission, which included Starship, was their 5th flight test. I did not get to watch it live. However, I saw some of it in reruns. I did not watch the whole entire broadcast. I watched about 15 or 20 minutes of it, but I thought that I would show you some of the highlights regarding basically what you could potentially imagine is going on with the thing that is Starship. I want to say a couple of things. I do want to kind of just let the video play, but
All flight crew members, this is the final go, no-go poll for operations. Raptor 1.
Raptor 1's go.
Raptor 2.
Go.
Stage 1.
Go.
Stage 2.
Go.
Flight directors go for launch. We have liftoff.
Vehicles pitching downrange. Max Q.
Ship engine startup.
Stage separation. Booster back burn.
On Albion 0, 30 seconds till catch decision.
Confirming 30 seconds to make that decision.
10 seconds till catch decision.
Hot stage separation confirmed.
Flight directors go for booster return. Operator go vote is set true. We are go for catch.
Booster coming in hot for booster catch.
Booster FTS is saved.
And I ignite 13 of those Raptor engines, and this view is incredible right now.
I can't wait for us to hear the sonic boom.
Booster landing burn startup.
We can see those chopsticks now. This is absolutely insane. On the first ever attempt, we have successfully caught the super heavy booster.
Villa has caught the booster.
Ship avionics power and telemetry nominal.
Starship has entered the atmosphere. Starship is approaching the peak heating phase of entry.
Landing bird startup.
Starship is on target. Starship has landed.
Very interesting. Very cool. We'll go through it, but basically on that fifth flight, it was the first time that a fully reusable Starship booster was caught using the tower that it lifted off from. And the importance of that is that it did not have to have landing legs. And what that means is reducing the weight. And also, if there was to be, say, one of these towers on a moon, such as our own, or on a different planet, such as Mars, you put one of these down, you can have a Starship fly down onto the surface and then have it land on this, not need landing legs, which saves a lot of weight, especially important when traveling millions and millions of miles all the way to France. It's very important to have that kind of stuff. If we are going to be traveling to these other planets, it's very, very important for us to be able to plop down on the surface and then go back up into re-entry. Or wait, no, that's wrong. Come back down, land on the surface, possibly refuel or drop off supplies, then go back up into orbit, possibly to a larger Starship model that's there to refuel, to hand off supplies, or potentially fuel that rocket up so that it could travel back to Earth. This is stuff that is humanly possible. But it's going to take a lot of work. This isn't going to be something that happens in the next 5 years. This is something that might happen in the next 25 years. It's going to take us a lot of advancement to get us to a point where we're able to land humans on Mars on a almost 100% basis. Which means basically you send a rocket up there, 9.99999 times out of 10, it's going to be a successful mission. That's what we're talking about. But interesting things to show, but let's talk about the sixth flight test. This is upcoming. So the sixth flight of Starship is scheduled to launch Tuesday, November 19th. The 30-minute launch window will open at 4 p.m. Central Time. because they're flying out of Texas. Starship's fifth flight was a seminal moment in iterating towards a fully and rapidly reusable launch system. On the first attempt, the Super Heavy booster successfully returned to the launch site and was caught by the chopstick arms of the launch and catch tower at Starbase. Starship's upper stage went on to demonstrate several improvements, resulting in controlled entry and high accuracy splashdown at the targeted area in the Indian Ocean. The next Starship flight test aims to expand the envelope on ship and booster capabilities and get closer to bringing reuse of the entire system online. Objectives include the booster once again returning to the launch site for catch, reigniting a ship Raptor engine while in space, and testing a suite of heat shield experiments and maneuvering changes for ship re-entry and descent over the Indian Ocean. So basically, do what it did again, except this time, do it slightly better. The success of the first catch attempt demonstrated the design feasibility while providing valuable data to continue improving hardware and software performance. Hardware upgrades for this flight add additional redundancy to booster propulsion systems, increase structural strength at key areas, and shorten the timeline to offload propellants from the booster following a successful catch. Mission designers also updated software controls and commit criteria for the booster's launch and return, so it should be a lot cleaner mission. The trajectory going out into space and the descent and eventual capture by the arms, but once again, the capture of the actual Starship, not the booster, the big thing at the end, that coming down safely and landing in the ocean. Two very, very important things. Analogous to the fifth flight test, distinct vehicle and pad criteria must be met prior to a return and catch of the Super Heavy booster, which will require healthy systems on the booster and tower and a final manual command from the mission's flight director. If this command is not sent prior to the completion of the boost back burn, or if automated health checks slow unacceptable conditions with Super Heavy or the tower, the booster will default to a trajectory that takes it to a landing burn and soft splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. We accept no compromises when it comes to ensuring the safety of the public and our team, and the return will only take place if conditions are right. That was one of the worries about even launching this past mission, is that they hadn't even obviously caught it with the arms, but they also hadn't done a previous mission where, hey, if we gotta bail, there's a chance that this falls right back on Earth, because they are trying to land back at the launch site. Usually at the landing site, it's kind of set up for landing. This site is set up for launch. Does not necessarily mean that they have the same capacity to field the rocket if anything goes wrong, because you have to fill the rocket up, you have to do all of this extra preparation to get the rocket up in the air. And when you have something that's going to be coming down, potentially if one of those engines goes out, multiple engines go out, all the engines go out, that thing could be crashing down into the surface of the Earth at hundreds of miles an hour, thousands of miles an hour, depending on how high up the engines fail. So it was very, very risky. The returning booster will slow down from supersonic speeds, resulting in audible sonic booms in the area around the landing zone. Generally, the only impact to those in the surrounding area of a sonic boom is the brief thunder-like noise, with variables like weather and distance from the return site determining the magnitude experienced by observers. You saw in the video that we watched of their fifth flight, it also broke the sound barrier. Starship's upper stage will fly the same suborbital trajectory as the previous flight test, with splashdown targeted in the Indian Ocean. An additional objective for this flight will be attempting an in-space burn using a single Raptor engine, further demonstrating the capabilities required to conduct a ship deorbit burn prior to orbital missions. Several thermal protection experiments and operational changes will test the limits of Starship's capability and generate flight data to inform plans for ship catch and reuse. The flight test will assess new secondary thermal protection materials and will have the entire sections of heat shield tiles removed on either side of the ship, and locations being studied for catch-enabling hardware on future vehicles. So they're trying to beef this thing up so this thing could survive basically deorbiting multiple times. You don't want this to be a one-use thing where you fly it to Mars and its heat shield burns off. And then if you were to fly it, say, back up in orbit around Mars and then come back down, it wouldn't be able to survive. The idea is to have these things be reusable, to save cost and also to save time. Future ships, starting with the vehicle planned for the 7th flight test, will fly with significant upgrades including redesigned forward flaps, large propellant tanks, and the latest generation tiles and secondary thermal protection layers as we continue to iterate towards a fully reusable heat shield. Interesting. Alright, this is basically it right here. Launches. Goes right there. Disengages this top section. Disengages from this bottom section. Bottom section flips around. Comes back. Flips back around again. Then it lands back there. Whereas this kind of goes off. And you see the Starship comes back, re-entries into Earth's atmosphere, and then it splashes down in the Indian Ocean. Very, very interesting. One of the interesting things that I found when doing some research on this topic was actually the things that help the Starship land. Let's take a look. Ever wondered how exactly SpaceX manages to precisely land a 63.3 meter tall, 3.7 meter wide, and a whopping 25,600 kilogram booster on a floating drone ship positions about 650 kilometers offshore? This is back in 2021. They're landing it on a crane now. They're landing it on land, so... The intuitive answer, of course, is ridiculous engineering, advanced algorithms, and insane software. The onboard computer ultimately adjusts the reaction control system, cold gas thrusters, and aerodynamic control surfaces to guide the booster to the landing spot at the right velocity and orientation. However, grid fins play a very important role in this process. So what are grid fins? Well, those things. And we'll talk about these in a little bit. But grid fins were originally developed during the Soviet era for use on Soviet ballistic missiles made in the 70s, such as the SS-12 Scaleboard, SS-20 Sabre, etc. They are used in the first place because reusable rockets like the Falcon 9 and the upcoming Starship cannot solely rely on the RCS to adjust orientation and stabilize the vehicle during all phases of descent, where both airspeed and air density vary rapidly and sometimes dangerously. Moreover, having RCS as a sole attitude control system would mean that the rocket will have to carry more of the working fluid, thus leading to a heavier booster. Therefore, an aerodynamic control surface requiring less hinge movement and that is effective at a wide range of Mach numbers is of great importance to such aerospace vehicles. The grid fin used on the latest version of a Falcon 9 is a locally swept peak-type titanium grid fin, which is unlike the earlier versions that were planar and made of aluminum. You see these right here. The upgrade from this one on the left to the one on the right, a lot beefier and a lot stronger. Now, how good are they compared to planar tail fins? Grid fins have by far been the best to satisfy the above requirements. These, also known by the names of lattice wings and lattice controls, are compact, unconventional aerodynamic control surfaces made up of multiple individual constituents, held rigidly together by a common framework. Some major examples include high aerodynamic effectiveness at low weight and volume, well-adjustable aerodynamic characteristics for wide ranges of Mach numbers and deflection angles, enhanced yaw stability at high incidence angles and improved roll stability, small hinge movements, I would imagine it's trying to say, with minimal shift of the center of pressure, implying that less torque and lighter machinery is required to actuate them. compact size and possibility to be folded down to the fuselage, making the missile more compact and easier to store or transport. However, there is one major drawback. The very multiplane construction of the grid fins gives rise to relatively high levels of drag waves and weak stability effectiveness at transonic speeds due to interference of Mach cones of individual members, resulting in a stronger bow shock upstream. So it isn't amazing, but it's pretty interesting. Yes. One of the earliest noticeable applications of grid fins on launch vehicles include the Russian Soyuz launch escape system. A similar system is also adopted by the ISRO for the upcoming Gaganyaan mission and in the crew escape system of the Chinese Long March 2F rockets used for the Shenzhou program. Grid fins have featured on a variety of missiles and air-to-ground weapons, such as the Russian Vimpel NPO R-77 missile, GBU-43, the Soviet N-1 moon rocket. Notice the range of speeds that each of the mentioned examples are designed to encounter. This shows the versatility of the lattice wing design. Yeah, some of these are going thousands and thousands of miles an hour, so that's interesting to know of. Yeah, see, look. This article was back in 2021, so 3 years ago. Back then, they knew this was the idea. The idea was to catch this thing by the grid fins, and that is indeed what happened 3 years later. Very, very, very interesting. I do have a video that I wanted to share with you and that I wanted to watch. Specifically showing grid fins in all of their glory. So let's come over and let's take a look.
If I have a rocket with no fins and blow a fan on it, it'll always turn sideways into the wind. And it wants to be sideways. But if I put fins on it, then it'll fly straight into the wind. But why? Well, there are two important points on a rocket: the center of gravity, where it would balance on a point, and the center of pressure, where it would balance if I held it at a pivot point into the wind. If the center of gravity is higher than the center of pressure, then the rocket will fly straight into the wind. But if the center of gravity is lower than the center of pressure, then the rocket will curve. So adding the fins gives the lower end of the rocket more side wind resistance, which lowers the center of pressure to keep the rocket flying straight. But you may have noticed that SpaceX rockets don't have fins at all. That's because their thrusters are on a gimbal, which continually corrects for the rocket trying to turn into the wind. Then once they get to space, there's no wind at all, so they don't need the fins anyways. Now you're all rocket scientists. If I have a rocket with no fins and blow a fan on it,
I think it's interesting to look at the size difference between Starship and Saturn V, the rocket that took us to the moon. This thing is massive, and Starship is bigger, at least as big, but I would say bigger, than the Saturn V rocket. Certainly the engines on it are much more powerful, but we are not seeing this thing go to the moon. That's because it's in very, very early stages of testing. But I do have confidence that in the upcoming years, this project could really, really bring us first back to the moon, but then to Mars. Another interesting question that I had always asked was about life. Where does it come from? How is it created, and what are the steps and options for people if they want to, say, be a member of this thing that we call life? What does it take to do that? Is it just sunlight and a nice climate? Apparently, that's not the case. Over 12,000 feet below the surface of the sea in a region of the Pacific Ocean known as the Clarion-Zipperson Zone, million-year-old rocks cover the seafloor. These rocks may seem lifeless, but nestled between the nooks and crannies on their surfaces, tiny sea creatures and microbes make their home, mainly unique, adapted to life in the dark. Usually when you're 12,000 feet below the surface of the ocean, There's not a lot of light that's getting down there. These deep sea rocks called polymetallic nodules don't only host a surprising number of sea critters. A team of scientists that includes Boston University experts has discovered they also produce oxygen on the sea floor. Oxygen, the thing that we breathe. The discovery is a surprise, considering oxygen is typically created by plants and organisms with help from the sun, not by rocks on the ocean floor. Usually, plants create it, and in order for them to create it, they need sunlight. And that was the kind of thought as to how these things were created. It was from sunlight and not from particularly anything else. Since the sun is needed to carry out photosynthesis, finding oxygen production at the bottom of the sea where there is no light flips conventional wisdom on its head. It was so unexpected that scientists involved in the study first thought it was a mistake. Polymetallic nodules are made of rare metals including copper, nickel, cobalt, iron, and manganese, which is why companies are interested in mining them. It turns out, according to the study, that those densely packed materials are likely triggering seawater electrolysis. This means that metal ions in the rock layers are distributed unevenly, creating a separation of electrical charges, just like what happens inside of a battery. This phenomenon creates enough energy to split water molecules into oxygen and hydrogen. They named this dark oxygen, since it's oxygen made with no sunlight. What remains unclear is the exact mechanism of how this happens, if oxygen levels vary across the CCZ, and if the oxygen plays a significant role in sustaining the local ecosystem. Interesting. Life in environments like the CCC provides an opportunity to study ecosystems that developed under distinct evolutionary pressures and constraints. Those conditions, the depth, pressure, and aquatic environment, are analogous to conditions we have measured or expect to discover on icy moons. Icy moons? What do you mean, icy moons? Well, for example, Jupiter's moon Enceladus and Saturn's moon Europa are covered with layers of ice with no sunlight reaching the water trapped underneath. Who knows? If these types of rocks are under the ice making oxygen, that could allow a more productive biosphere to exist. If photosynthesis isn't required to make oxygen, then other planets with oceans and metal-rich rocks like these nodules could sustain a more evolved biosphere than we've thought possible in the past. Through this function, there are certain moons out there that could harbor life that is different than what we have on Earth. Interesting. Now, one of those moons is something that I want to spend the remainder of today's show kind of talking about. And it's a mission that I think is extremely important and extremely interesting. That is the Europa Clipper mission. We'll take a second. We'll watch the video.
The most exciting thing about Europa can be summarized in one word: water. Now think about all the water on Earth and double that. That's what we think is on Europa.
We need to go there to explore it, to understand, is this place a habitable environment that could potentially support life?
Getting close to Europa is a huge challenge. It sits in the worst possible radiation environment, trapped by Jupiter.
Europa is a moon of Jupiter, about the size of Earth's moon, which has an icy surface that probably hides a subsurface ocean.
Scientists think Europa has the key ingredients to support life as we know it. Number 1, water. Number 2, energy. And 3, essential chemical building blocks. For the first time ever, we're sending a spacecraft completely dedicated to studying this moon.
The three main things that we're going to explore at Europa are the ice and the ocean and understand that intersection between the two, study the chemical composition of the moon, as well as the geology and whether it's active currently.
Europa Clipper is not specifically a life search mission. We're going to understand the potential habitability of Europa. The spacecraft has 9 instruments and a gravity science investigation. 5 of the instruments are called remote sensing instruments because they measure light reflected off Europa, like a camera or a spectrometer. The other 4 instruments are measuring the environment around them, like sniffing gases or dust.
Europa Clipper is the largest spacecraft NASA has ever built for a planetary mission.
It weighs 13,000 pounds, 6.5 tons. That's like the size of a huge African elephant.
And the solar arrays are massive. If you put the solar arrays at the toes of the Statue of Liberty, the other end of the arrays would come up to the Statue of Liberty's crown.
So not only are they big, these things are technological marvels. They are being bathed in radiation all the time, and they have to survive the entire mission like that.
Jupiter's radiation environment is intense, and Europa sits in the worst part of that environment.
Jupiter acts like a giant particle accelerator. There are charged particles trapped in Jupiter's magnetosphere that rotate with it. And these particles slam against Europa and will slam into our spacecraft as well.
We protect the spacecraft in 2 ways. Number 1, we try to minimize the amount of time we spend in there, which is why we are orbiting Jupiter and just flying by Europa. The second way we protect against the radiation is by having an electronics vault that we put our computer and some of the other sensitive electronics inside, which is made of about 1/3 of an inch of aluminum.
With each flyby of Europa, the outside surface of the spacecraft sees the equivalent of 1 million chest X-rays, just as we're flying by.
It's a pretty long trip to get to Jupiter from Earth, but not that bad from a planetary standpoint.
From launch to the time we get to Jupiter is about 5.5 years. And along the way, we have a flyby of Mars and then another flyby of Earth to get gravity assists to slingshot the spacecraft out to Jupiter.
I hope for the future explorers who are watching this at home that they take away from this that humanity, when we come together, can achieve really cool things.
This mission has been a long time coming, and we're so excited about what we're going to see when we get there.
We are in a golden age of robotic spaceflight exploration. How could you not be excited about something as monumental as this?
I am most excited about the potential to unlock the secrets of Europa, the potential to really understand this crazy world that exists and has likely existed in this condition for 4 billion years.
I think this is a very, very interesting mission. I don't remember when it was, but there was a time many years ago when I first got introduced to Europa, right? And I actually saw a movie about this small icy moon, and this was before I ever went to college, which, like I've mentioned, is where I got my love, got my desire for what space was. My search for life elsewhere. My desire to want our society and our civilization to venture out into space. To venture outwards. To populate this beautiful universe. This is one of the very, very first things that ever piqued my interest. This is the Europa Report.
T-minus 10, 9, 8.
Good morning. We are all very excited to be here today. This really is a new first step for mankind.
I would hope we keep looking for the answers to those really tough questions. Who are we? Where do we come from? And are we alone?
Internal cam check is a go.
Our craft was heading for a moon of Jupiter, known as Europa.
Yeah, my boy's gonna be 6 when I see him again.
He's gonna be proud of you.
Oxygen is flowing, we're good.
Commencing egress. Navigate zone. Prep for orbital transfer. We are clear of Jupiter's orbit.
Pitching for power descent. Ladies and gentlemen, hold on. Here we go.
I can't believe I'm here. This is incredible.
Our best hopes of success lies under the ice.
Let's go for a swim. You hear that?
Are you guys seeing this? It's beautiful.
Come back to the ship now.
I want to see if it's reacting to my lights. I'm going to turn them off.
Compared to the breadth of knowledge yet to be known, what does your life actually matter?
No one at home knows we're alive.
Find a way. We have to.
We got a problem.
It's everywhere.
Close the lock. Thought I was trying to do something great for mankind.
What was that?
Always said it was worth the risk.
I'll get you out of this.
Talk to me!
Forgive me.
Very creepy, very mysterious. I really liked that movie. I thought it was a fairly good movie, and it was one of the very early movies. I was at a time in my life where I wanted to watch scary movies alone. I'm not that guy anymore. It started off as a really cool movie. I was like, ooh, they're going to this place. This seems somewhat realistic. Now, we just watched a video prior to this one that says the radiation there is equivalent to about 1 million X-rays. Yeah, that's not something that humans could just plop on and just run a mission. But I thought it was a very funny movie, and like I said, it was one of those movies that really got me interested in this place called Europa. In 1972, scientists using a telescope at Kit Peak National Observatory in Tucson, Arizona, made spectroscopic observations that showed that Europa's surface composition is mostly water ice. Thermal models dating back to 1971 also suggested that the interior of Europa could contain a layer of liquid water. NASA's Pioneer 10 and 11 spacecraft flew by Jupiter in the early 1970s, but the first spacecraft to image the surfaces of Jupiter's moon in significant detail were the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft. Voyager's 1 closest approach to Jupiter occurred March 4, 1979. The spacecraft snapped a full global image of Europa from a distance of about 1.2 million miles. And you can see this image of Europa from 1.6 million miles away, which is crazy. We're closer to our moon than... Our moon is about 250,000 miles away. So this is quite significantly further away from it than that. And it's still got that good of a picture. Back in 79? Yeah, back in 1979. Crazy. A few months later, Voyager 2 had its close encounter with Europa on July 9th, 1979. Images from the two Voyagers revealed a surface brighter than that of Earth's moon, crisscrossed with numerous bands and ridges, and with a surprising lack of large impact craters, tall cliffs, or mountains. In other words, Europa has a very smooth surface relative to the other icy moons. What does this mean? You can see this very close image of Europa right here. Even though the Voyagers did not pass extremely close to Europa, their images were of high enough quality that researchers noted some of the dark bands had opposite sides that matched each other extremely well, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. These cracks had separated and dark icy material appeared to have flowed into the open gaps, suggesting that the surface had been active at some time in the past. Voyager's images showed only a handful of impact craters, which are expected to build up over time as planetary surface is constantly bombarded by meteorites over billions of years. Thus, a lack of large impact craters suggested that the moon's surface was relatively young and implied that something had erased them, such as icy volcanic flows or settling of the icy crust under its own weight. These intriguing findings led to a strong sense of anticipation for NASA's Galileo mission, which launched in 1989 and entered orbit around Jupiter in 1995. Galileo's primary mission included observations of each of the 4 Galilean moons during repeated flybys. The information about Europa that Galileo sent was so intriguing that the mission was extended for a 2-year follow-on journey known as the Galileo Europa mission. In all, the spacecraft made a total of 12 close flybys of the icy moon. Look at this. This is from the Galileo spacecraft right here, this picture. Very interesting. One of the most important discoveries made by Galileo showed how Jupiter's magnetic field was disrupted in the space around Europa. This measurement strongly implied that a special type of magnetic field is being created within Europa by a deep layer of some electrically conductive fluid beneath the surface. Based on Europa's icy compositions, scientists think the most likely material to create this magnetic signature is a global ocean of salty water. Interesting. There's some of that on Earth here. Scientists think Europa's ice shell is 10 to 15 miles thick, floating on an ocean 40 to 100 miles deep. So, while Europa is only 1/4 the diameter of Earth, its ocean may contain twice as much water as Earth's global ocean. Europa's ocean is considered one of the most promising places in the solar system to look for life beyond Earth. While no plumes were observed while the Galileo spacecraft was in the Jupiter system in the 90s, more recent observations from telescopes such as the Hubble Space Telescope, as well as a reanalysis of some data from the Galileo spacecraft, have suggested that it is possible that thin plumes of water are being ejected 100 miles above Europa's surface. In November 2019, an international research team led by NASA astronauts announced it had directly detected water vapor for the first time above Europa's surface. The team measured the vapor using a spectrograph at the Keck Observatory in Hawaii that measures the chemical composition of planetary atmospheres through the infrared light they emit or absorb. If the plumes do exist and their source is linked to Europa's ocean, then a spacecraft could travel through the plume to sample and analyze it from orbit, and it would essentially be analyzing the moon's oceans. NASA's Cassini spacecraft performed this feat at Saturn's moon Enceladus, which is known to have an ocean spraying into space. Even if Europa isn't ejecting samples into space, a 2018 study concluded that samples of Europa's ocean could get frozen in the base of the moon ice shell where the ice makes contact with the ocean. As the shell distorts and flexes from tidal forces, warmer and less dense ice would arise, carrying the ocean samples to the surface, where a spacecraft could analyze it remotely using infrared and ultraviolet instruments, among others. Interesting. Life as we know it seems to have 3 main requirements. We talked about this in an earlier video. Liquid water, certain chemical elements, and an energy source. Also, life takes time to develop. Europa's oceans may have existed for the entirety of our solar system's history. Astrobiologists, scientists who study the origin, evolution, and future of life in the universe believe Europa has abundant water and the right chemical elements, the building blocks of life, including carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. The third ingredient for life is energy. All life forms need energy to survive. On Earth, most of that energy comes from the sun. But the type of life that may inhabit Europa likely would be powered purely by chemical reactions instead of by photosynthesis, because any life at Europa would exist beneath the ice where there is no sunlight. Europa's surface is blasted by radiation from Jupiter. That's a bad thing for life on the surface. It couldn't survive, but the radiation may create fuel for life in an ocean below the surface. Interesting. Now, we're not saying there's going to be big, giant, huge monsters under there, but there could be microbial life, which would be very, very interesting. I mean, look at the surface right here. These long streaks and these big slices that are taken out of it. Very, very. They say you should never judge a book by its cover. In planetary science, it's sometimes best to weigh this rule of thumb. Surface features of planetary bodies can give us important hints about what's happening inside a world. In the case of Jupiter's moon Europa, what we saw on the surface opened whole new realms of possibility for the search of life. When NASA's twin Voyager spacecraft passed through the Jupiter system in 1979, they sent back the first detailed images of the icy moons. These superficial observations hinted at something monumental, the possibility of a layer of liquid water beneath the surface. Though the potential of lava was indeed exciting, much more important was the possibility that this same gravitational squeezing might melt the interior of an icy moon like Europa, because Jupiter's a big planet, and I'll get into kind of the explanation of how this could keep that water warm and help smooth out the surface as well, but I'll get to that later. When the Voyager probe sent back images of a smooth surface covered in cracks and freckles, the implication was clear. Features like this are caused by tectonic activity. When a solid crust floats on top of a liquid layer, it causes the crust to move, split, and constantly resurface itself. Whereas on a rocky moon like Io, the liquid layer is molten rock. On icy Europa, the liquid layer is molten ice. In other words, water. So different surfaces. The discovery opened the possibility that life beyond Earth could exist in the frigid far reaches of the solar system. The search for life generally focuses on looking for liquid water, which is an essential requirement for life as we know it. Keyword, as we know it. At Jupiter's distance from the Sun, temperatures are so low that water takes the form of ice as hard as granite. The expectation is that life would therefore not be able to exist in these conditions. But the tidal forces that squeeze and heat Europa's interior change the game, and in doing so, dramatically expand the range of where we might find life. Further observations by spacecrafts like NASA's Galileo mission added to our understanding of Europa's subsurface oceans. New discoveries reinforce the possibility that life could theoretically exist in Europa's waters, making this little world all the more important to the search for life. And, as you'll read in this issue of the Planetary Report, Europa is not the only world that hides liquid water beneath its surface. Enceladus, Ganymede, Titan, and even distant Triton all showed signs of subsurface oceans. Maybe I could talk about those in a later podcast. Is there life below Europa's icy surface? These cutting-edge instruments will find out. So, kind of talking about the Clipper mission and kind of what is going to help us discover what's going on this surface. So, let's talk about what's going to be actually used for scientific measurements. Exploring Europa, potential for life. 2 Southwest Research Institute instruments were launched aboard NASA's Europa Clipper spacecraft on October 14th. This mission aims to closely study Jupiter's moon Europa, exploring whether it has conditions that might support life. The SWRI, or the Southwest Research Institute, developed instruments, the mass spectrometer for planetary exploration, and the ultraviolet spectrograph. are part of 9 scientific instruments and a gravity investigation developed to examine Europa. In the 1990s, talking about the liquid ocean, you can see this right here is an image of a dude or a woman. It's hard to tell from right here. Yeah, this is the mass spectrometer for planetary exploration. That's what this is right here. Pretty complicated. So what is mass specs? The high-resolution spectrometer for Europa's ocean. The ability to characterize this ocean remotely is key. Mass specs has a mass resolution 50 times finer than anything that has flown to space before. Mass specs can differentiate between molecules with almost identical masses based on the energy binding the atoms. It also differentiates isotopes, atoms with equal numbers of protons but different numbers of neutrons. These capabilities are crucial to revealing the habitability of Europa. This is the ultraviolet spectrograph right here. Very interesting. Let's take a look. Very interesting. Crazy. Europa UVS is the 6th in a series of SWRI-built ultraviolet spectrographs, benefiting greatly from the design experience gained by its team from the Juno UVS instrument, which is currently operating in Jupiter's harsh radiation environment on NASA's Juno spacecraft. UVS is designed to hunt down and study potential plumes emanating from surface cracks on Europa. UVS will look at the composition and chemistry of Europa's atmosphere to understand its source, structure, and variability. It will search for and characterize plumes in terms of activity and the nature of subsurface water reservoirs. Once UVS detects any potential plumes, the spacecraft might fly through them, allowing mass specs to sniff the volatile gases. Interesting. I've seen things say that it could fly as close as 10 miles to the surface as well. So theoretically, if the plumes are able to go 100 miles, 10 miles should be very, very highly concentrated stuff that you're flying through. The mass spectrometer is designed to measure the molecular and isotopic composition of these gases, offering insight into the oxidation state of the moon's subsurface ocean and potential metabolic energy sources for potential microbial life. With these precise measurements, the composition of the gases will reveal the story of the interior and whether the conditions for life exist beneath the oceans. Another UVS is en route to Jupiter now aboard ESA's Jupiter Icy Moons Explorers to orbit both Jupiter and its moon Ganymede. Having 2 UVS instruments in the Jupiter system making measurements will offer exciting complementary science possibilities. So this little thing, JUICE, is primarily stunning Ganymede, but it will fly past Europa twice. Europa Clipper is NASA's largest solar-powered spacecraft for a planetary mission, and it will enter a long looping orbit around the gas giant Jupiter to perform repeated close flybys of the moon over a 4-year period. In total, the mission will perform nearly 50 flybys at altitudes ranging from 16 miles to 1,700 miles. The Europa Clipper mission, developed by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in collaboration with the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, aims to explore Jupiter's moon Europa to assess its potential for supporting life. And then a bunch of other stuff, yeah. So they're going to look at the plumes, going to try and see what's inside of the plumes, and basically study what's going on in that ocean. Some more images you can kind of see right here. Let's see a current view. This is currently what it looks like. Now where's Earth in the background over here? There's Earth right over there. Let's see. See if we can get the both. right here. If I were to go outside right now, I could look up and I could see Jupiter. I use this app called Night Sky, and I love using it. It's an app on your phone, and what you do is you can look at the sky. Take a look at some of these images. Absolutely beautiful. Let's go back. Here's the subsurface ocean. Scientists have found evidence of plate tectonics on Jupiter's moon Europa. This conceptual illustration of the subduction process, where one plate is forced under another, shows how a cold, brittle outer portion of Europa's 20 to 30 kilometer thick, roughly 10 to 20 mile ice shell moved into the warmer shell interior and was ultimately subsumed. A low relief subsumption band was created at the surface in the overriding plane, alongside which cryolavas may have erupted. Basically, lava, more or less. And here is kind of a figure from this particular study talking about Europa in and of itself. This is just a picture from this study. I will put it down in the description so that you are able to view it. But I just wanted to show this image because this kind of shows you the core of the moon, then the kind of meat and potatoes right in here before you get to this liquid water ocean, and then the outer shell. And within this ocean, there is the belief that the ocean floor, like we now know, is created here on Earth, potential to create oxygen and potential to create life because of the liquid water, but also because of the heat that is generated by tidal forces, by this planet pushing and pulling on its interior via Jupiter and Jupiter's gravity. And the other interesting thing is, if the outer core, the thing that is between the outer atmosphere and the vacuum of space versus this liquid water ocean where there could potentially be life, there's a chance that that distance between them is thick enough that extremely harmful radiation from Jupiter is not able to get through that, and that life in there is protected. Not saying that it's going to be 100-foot-long dragons or anything, but it could potentially be single-celled, very, very primitive life. But guess what? That's still life. That's still life. It still counts. We'll continue on. Specifically, last thing I wanted to talk about was tidal heating, because this is something that's important to think about with the ocean. One of the concerns is you're so far away from the sun. It's so cold out there. Even if it is liquid water, it's got to be absolutely freezing. Now, I'm not going to come out here and say it feels like a hot tub in there, but it is certainly warm enough that it is liquid water. Not necessarily 10 degrees water, but at least 33 degrees Fahrenheit. Which is interesting. When we think of tides on Earth, images of changing sea levels at a beach or lake may come to mind. A different but certainly related definition of a tide is presented by Morrison and Owen. A tide is a distortion in the shape of one body induced by the gravitational pull of another nearby object. In the case of Earth, the moon, and to a lesser extent the sun, both raise tides on the planet. What results on the Earth due to the gravitational field of the moon, or more specifically, the variation of this field over the volume of the Earth, are two distinct tidal bulges. One bulge is on the side of the Earth closer to the moon, and the other is opposite of this. Together, these are responsible for the two high tides observed daily on Earth. The variations are due to the sensitive dependence inverse square of the Newton's universal law of gravitation. So you can see, wherever the moon is, that's typically where a lot of the water wants to go to. Similarly, the much more massive Earth deforms the moon such that the side of the moon nearer to the Earth experience a gravitational tug, and two bulges separated by 180 degrees in lunar longitude are formed. As you can see right here. Interesting. Our moon is in synchronous orbit with the Earth to reduce the amount of energy that is removed from its rotation. In this configuration, the moon's period of revolution is equal to its period of rotation. The same side of the moon is always distorted and therefore always faces the Earth. Another way to say that is that the moon is tidally locked to the Earth. This is common among major satellites in the solar system, including those of the planet Jupiter, which would include Europa. Jupiter is much more massive than Earth, so it deforms its moons much more dramatically. Where things become interesting for this purpose is the fact that Jupiter's moon, Io, Europa, and Ganymede are in what's called orbital resonance. Io and Europa are in what's called 2-to-1 resonance. This means that for every complete orbit that Europa makes around Jupiter, Io completes exactly 2. So you see Europa right here completes 2, while this completes 1, or this completes 2, this completes 1, this completes 2, this completes 1. I believe that's correct. Or this completes 4 and this completes 1. Taking just the cases of Io and Europa into consideration, a consequence of these configurations is that when two satellites line up, the gravitational pull of Europa on Io is enough to alter its orbit from what would be a perfectly circular synchronous orbit into that of an ellipse. Interesting. A geometric sequence of this new orbit for Io is that its distance from Jupiter is constantly changing, and therefore the tidal forces on it are constantly deforming the satellite. Given the short period of time of orbit for Io, less than 2 Earth days, and the considerable mass of Jupiter, what results is a tremendous amount of internal friction on the moon's structure. This friction generates the heat that is responsible for making Io the most active volcanic place in the solar system. Very. Because of Europa's location between Io and the more massive Ganymede, it also undergoes this same mechanism. This heats the subsurface of Europa. To date, it is at the center of much research regarding a possible subsurface ocean layer between the moon's icy surface. Very interesting. And here's that same image right there of this tidal force that's happening. So you have Jupiter right here, and to the right of it, you have, in our case, Io, but then outside of it, Europa. And now Europa, it's spinning on its axis. However, it's always going to have that force, the tidal force, going towards Jupiter. This is the reason why it is able to stay heated. And the idea is that it's heated enough to a point where it is liquid water. And I think that's extremely exciting. There's many things that I have a lot of hope for this mission and kind of the evidence that we see. If we find life, or even the remnants of life, or even the ingredients for life around this moon, it's a good sign. Frankly, I would be over the moon enjoyed if we found evidence of life here, because then we're not alone. I think to start the podcast off talking about kind of this past election cycle and my thoughts of where our country is headed, where our planet's headed, and what the future holds. I'm not very confident that we're going to be able to set aside our differences and do what we were made to do, which is go out into the universe and spread love and joy and happiness. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. But until then, you and I can sit here and we can talk and you can listen to kind of what I have to say about things. And hopefully in the future I'm able to have conversations with people and post them, because I don't know everything. Like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I don't know everything, and I think I do. I know I don't know everything. That's why I want to speak to people. That's why I want to talk to people who know this stuff, who can give me answers, who can point me in the right direction, and can point you in the right direction. This is the Zach Moore Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.